Montana Territory, August 1883. Dust kicked up behind the stagecoach as it rattled down the rutted trail, and Delaney Linwood gripped her satchel tighter, her knuckles white beneath her gloves. The letter in her pocket felt heavier than it should have, like the weight of her sister's future was stitched into the paper. She had hired herself out. That was the truth of it. Sold her time and her strength so her younger sister, Bethany, could keep the dowry their late father had promised. $200. Not much to some, but everything to them. Without it, Bethany's marriage would fall apart before it began. The groom's father had made that clear. Delaney stepped off the stage in the small cattle town of Red Butte, blinking against the bright sun. Her new employer had sent a letter through a cousin in Helena. Work available. Boarding included. Fair pay. No name. Just an address and a scrawled signature, M. O'Dare. She found the ranch house 3 miles outside of town, past acres of sunburnt grass and black Angus grazing under a wide sky. The place wasn't large, but it was clean, with a split-rail fence and a worn path leading to the barn. A man stepped out of the stable, tall and broad-shouldered, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, a streak of dirt across his cheek. His dark hair curled a little where the sweat had touched it, and when he looked up, their eyes met. "You must be Miss Linwood," he said, wiping his hands on a rag and tucking it into his back pocket. "I'm Merritt O'Dare." Delaney nodded, trying not to stare. "I was told you needed help with bookkeeping or house management." "I did. Still do. But I didn't expect someone like you." Her chin lifted. "Someone like me?" He shrugged. "You look like someone who belonged in a schoolhouse or a church pew, not riding in from Helena to work cattle ledgers." Delaney crossed her arms. "I can read, write, and work 16 hours straight. I did not come all this way to be sent back." Merritt studied her a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's get you settled." The room he offered her in the main house had a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that overlooked the ridge. That night, she unpacked her things in silence. She did not cry. She had already done that, days ago, when she'd pawned her mother's brooch to buy the ticket. The next morning before sunrise, she was already at the kitchen table, checking the ledger books. Merritt walked in holding 2 mugs of coffee. He handed her one without a word. "You pay your staff with coin or coffee?" she asked lightly. He smiled, and it was the kind that tugged at the corners of his eyes. "Depends on the day." The days stretched into a rhythm: mornings doing figures, afternoons checking inventory in the barns, evenings quiet with the sounds of crickets and the occasional low of cattle. Merritt was not a man of many words, but he noticed things. When she rubbed her wrist, sore from writing too long, he left a tin of salve by her door. When the wind rattled the windows one night, he checked twice to make sure her latch was bolted. And one evening, after a long day of riding out to count heads, he walked her back to the house, the lantern swinging between them. "You said you came here for the work," he said quietly. "But you never said why." Delaney hesitated, then looked at him. "My sister. She's getting married in September. My father passed last winter, and there was no dowry. Her fiancé's family said no money, no wedding. I could not let her lose something good." Merritt nodded slowly. "So you gave up your life so she could have hers." "I did what I had to." He looked down at the ground, silent for a moment. "You should not have had to." The words were simple, but they hit deep. No one else had said that. No one else had thought she deserved better. That night, she lay awake thinking about how Merritt always said what he meant, even if it came in few words. 2 days later, the telegram arrived. She had just come back from the barn, her braid messy from the wind, when Merritt handed it to her. The paper was crinkled, the ink smudged. "Bethany married early. Dowry received. Thank you. Come home soon. Love, B." Delaney folded the slip carefully, her fingers trembling. She had done it. She had given Bethany the future she deserved. She looked up and met Merritt's gaze. He had seen the message when he handed it to her. "You have done what you came for," he said. "I have. You will leave then. I suppose I should." He nodded, but his jaw tightened, and he looked away. The next morning, she packed her bag. She did not have much. 3 dresses, a pair of gloves, a worn locket. Merritt stood by the porch, watching her tie the leather straps. "I have something for you," he said. From his coat pocket, he pulled a small metal tin. Inside was $200 in clean notes. Delaney stared. "What is this?" "I know your sister's dowry already came. But you should not have had to pay it. I am giving it back to you." Her voice caught. "Merritt, I cannot." "You can. And you will. Because I watched you work harder than any man I have hired. And because I do not want you to leave thinking this world only takes." She shook her head, tears brimming. "Why would you do this for me?" He stepped forward. "Because I want you to stay. Not just as a worker. As something more." She stared up at him, heart thudding. "I am offering you my name," he said simply. "If you will take it." Delaney's breath left her in a rush. "You would marry me?" "I would. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because every day you were here, I found myself waiting to hear your voice, watching for you in the barnyard, wishing I could say more." Delaney stepped forward, took his hand. "I do not want to go back," she whispered. "Then do not." She smiled through her tears. "Then say it again." "I am offering you my name," he said, brushing her hair back gently. "And if you say yes, I will spend every day proving it was the best choice either of us ever made." Her kiss was soft, but sure, and when she pulled back, the answer was in her eyes. She was not leaving. She had saved her sister's dowry. And now the cowboy had paid it and given her his heart, too. The first snowfall came early that year, dusting the dry grass and fence rails in soft white. Delaney stood on the porch with her coat drawn close, watching Merritt hitch the wagon. He moved with care, steady and unhurried, the horses already trained to his rhythm. "We'll need more salt pork and beans," he said, adjusting the yoke strap. "And you'll want heavier stockings before the real cold sets in." "I brought what I could," she replied, brushing a flake from her sleeve. "But I'll admit, Helena Winters never reached this far inside your bones." He glanced up at her, eyes warm despite the wind. "You'll be warm enough here." She believed him. They'd been married 2 weeks, just the 2 of them and the preacher from town. No lace, no guests, only a copper band and a promise spoken clear. Merritt hadn't rushed anything. He gave her time, space. Let things unfold like the land itself, open and slow, with no need to press. Delaney had started sewing curtains for the front windows. She used a bolt of calico she found folded in a trunk beneath the bed, likely bought years ago and forgotten. The fabric was faded at the edges, but she liked that, felt honest. That afternoon, she found Merritt in the workshop behind the barn, shaping a new yoke with a draw knife. He looked up as she entered, brushing wood shavings from his lap. "You built all this yourself?" she asked, stepping over the scattered curls of pine. "My father started it. I finished after he passed." She traced a fingertip along the edge of the workbench. "You never mentioned him." He set the tool down. "He was a hard man, fair but hard. Didn't think much of words." "Did he approve of how you run things now?" Merritt took a moment before answering. "I think he'd have liked you." Delaney looked at him then, the quiet weight of that simple sentence settling between them. She didn't ask for more. Instead, she picked up a rough-handled hammer and turned it over in her palm. "I never lived on land before. Just rooms with borrowed furniture and someone else's rules. You can make your own rules here. Later that week, they rode together to the trading post. Delaney sat beside him, gloved hands folded in her lap, the wind tugging strands from beneath her bonnet. Merritt didn't speak much on the trail, but when he did, it was never idle. "There's a creek that runs east of the ridge," he said, eyes on the horizon. "Freezes over by December. We'll go cut ice before then. Store it in sawdust. I'll help you." He glanced at her, then nodded once. "I know." The store was quiet, warmed by a potbelly stove and the scent of tobacco. Delaney moved through the shelves while Merritt spoke with the owner about a shipment of nails. She chose lamp oil, a tin of preserves, and a small bar of rose soap. When she placed it on the counter, Merritt gave her a look she didn't quite read. "For your bath," she explained. He didn't smile, but there was something softer in the set of his shoulders as he handed over the coins. That evening, after the supper dishes were scrubbed and stacked, she found him on the back stoop, sharpening his hunting knife by lantern light. She sat beside him, the air sharp enough to cloud their breath. "Do you ever think about leaving?" He didn't look up. "No. Not even when it's hard?" "Especially then." Delaney leaned against the post, letting the silence stretch. "I used to believe I'd never settle anywhere, that if I stayed too long, something would be taken from me. And now," she drew her knees up beneath her skirt, "now I think I'd be the one doing the leaving. And I don't want that." He set the blade down. "You won't." She turned to face him. "How can you be sure?" "Because I know what it means to go too long without something you need. And I won't make you reach for what I should already be giving." There was no kiss, not yet. Just the quiet closeness of two people who'd chosen the same road, even if they hadn't walked all of it yet. Inside, the fire burned low. She watched him bank it before bed, his hands steady on the poker, his movements deliberate. She thought of how easily he could have been distant, how many men would have taken her gratitude and called it love. But Merritt O'Dare had given her more than a roof or a name. He gave her time. He gave her space to become someone new without asking her to forget who she'd been. And in return, she gave him the pieces of herself she had once tucked away quietly, without ceremony, but fully. They slept in the same bed now, but always with care. He never reached for her in the dark, never presumed. But when her fingers found his beneath the quilt, he held on, warm and steady, as if they'd always belonged there. By late October, the earth had hardened beneath hooves and boots alike. Frost clung to the fence posts each morning, stubborn as old grief. Delaney pulled her shawl tight as she stepped outside, the hem of her skirt brushing against the brittle grass. In the distance, Merritt was walking the perimeter with two of his hands, checking for gaps in the southern fence line. The cattle had been restless the night before, uneasy in the shift of season. She carried her sewing basket to the porch and sat in the sunlight, her fingers steady as she turned worn linen into fresh dishcloths. The rhythm soothed her, but her eyes wandered often toward the barn, toward the ridge, toward the path Merritt would take when he returned. It had been 3 weeks since they married. She'd watched the changes unfold not in declarations, but in the quiet way their lives now touched, his boots by hers at the door, her handwriting in his supply logs, his coat draped over her shoulders when she lingered too long by the cellar steps. Still, she hadn't yet asked what he saw when he looked at her. She wasn't sure what she wanted the answer to be. When Merritt came back up the lane, his collar dusted with hay chaff and his hat pulled low against the wind, he paused at the porch rail and looked at what she was working. "You're always making something useful out of what's left behind," he said. Delaney glanced down at the frayed edge she was mending. "I suppose it's a habit." He leaned an elbow against the post. "I found my mother's ring in the bottom of a drawer this morning." She lowered the cloth. I didn't know you'd kept it. I didn't know I had. It must have been tucked there since I was a boy. She waited, sensing more. I thought maybe you'd wear it, if you'd like. He drew the ring from his coat pocket. The gold had dulled with time, but the band was unbent, the stone still set firm. Delaney reached for it slowly. Are you certain? He met her eyes. I am. She slid it onto her finger. It fit without resistance. That evening, she cooked with the last of the preserved carrots and a bit of salt beef. Merritt came in just before dusk, his shoulders tired, his hands raw from fence wire. She didn't ask how the repairs went. Instead, she ladled the stew into bowls and lit the lamp while he washed up. As they ate, he watched her spoon rest beside her plate, untouched. You've been quiet since I gave you the ring. I've never had anything passed down before. It feels like more than I know what to do with. It's yours now. You don't need to do anything but wear it. She looked up, the firelight catching in her eyes. Did your mother wear it long? Only a few years. She died when I was small. I remember the sound of her voice more than her face. Delaney set her spoon down. I never knew mine. Bethany was born sickly, and our mother passed not long after. I think that's why I've always tried to fix things. I thought if I could hold everything together long enough, maybe nothing else would fall apart. You don't have to do that here. The words came quiet, but they settled deep. She nodded once, then reached across the table and laced her hand with his. Later, they sat near the hearth, each with a book in hand. The silence between them had changed, no longer an absence, but a presence. Merritt closed his book first. I want to build a root cellar come spring. The one behind the barn's too shallow. I can help dig. I know you can, but I'd rather you planned what we'll store in it. She smiled faintly. So it's ours now? He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. It's always been yours. I just didn't know how to say it. Delaney closed her book. You didn't need to. She stood and crossed to him. You've been saying it since the first night you left that tin of salve by my door. He touched her waist lightly, then stood. You're not afraid anymore. I was never afraid of you, she said. I was afraid of wanting something I couldn't keep. You can keep this. She looked up at him, her breath steady. Then come to bed. They walked back to the room they now shared, her hand in his, the fire behind them casting long, quiet shadows on the wood floor. That night, the wind rose outside, but inside there was only warmth and the slow, certain way two lives began to shape themselves into one. The frost thickened as November crept across the land, layering the fields in a pale hush. Delaney woke before dawn most mornings, drawn not by habit but by a restlessness she couldn't quite name. She'd begun collecting dried roots and storing them in glass jars along the pantry shelf, labeling them in neat script. Merritt had noticed but hadn't asked. He rarely did unless he meant to listen all the way through. The day before the first hard freeze, she found him oiling the hinges on the barn's storm doors. His sleeves were rolled, exposing a long scar along his forearm, pale against the cold reddened skin. How'd that happen? She asked, stepping closer. He glanced down, then back at the hinge. Horse panicked when I was 16, kicked through a rail. I tried to calm him too quick. Didn't anyone help? He set the rag aside. My uncle stitched it. Said next time I'd learn to let a creature breathe before putting hands on it. Delaney ran her fingers just along the curve of the old wound, not touching, only tracing the air above it. You don't rush anything now. Not after that. Inside the house, she'd taken to moving furniture, inch by inch each day, adjusting the flow of light and warmth through the rooms. Merritt didn't seem to mind. He left space for her to make the place her own. One evening, she pulled an old rocker from the attic, dusted it clean, and set it near the hearth. When he came in from the fields, he stood for a long while, gazing at it. "That was my mother's," he said. "I figured. The joints are worn smooth where hands used to rest. She sang in that chair," he said. "Low and quiet. I never remembered the words, just the sound." Delaney didn't reply, but later that night, she laid her sewing in her lap and hummed while she worked. Not a tune she knew, just something soft and steady that might have belonged to any mother, anywhere. The first snow came 2 days later, light but lasting. Merritt brought in a rabbit before breakfast, fresh shot and still warm. Delaney skinned it and set it to stew without asking. He watched her work, his eyes following the sure movements of her hands. "You knew how to do that before you came here." "I learned in pieces," she said, rinsing the blade, "from a neighbor's wife when I was 11. She had 5 boys and no time to coddle. Said if I wanted to eat, I'd better earn it." He pulled a chair from the table and Saturday, "You've earned more than a meal." She looked over her shoulder. "You always say things like that when I'm not expecting it. I think it's the only way I know how." That night, she found him on the porch again, sharpening his smaller knife with a whetstone. He didn't look up when she stepped beside him. "I've been thinking," she said, "about winter, about what comes after." His hand paused. "You want to leave come spring?" "No," she said firmly. "I want to know how we build something with 2 hands instead of 1. Merritt set the blade down. "We start with the land. It's all we have, really. And I want to keep bees." His eyebrows lifted. "Bees? I read about it once. A teacher I worked for kept a hive behind her house. Honey, wax, medicine. They stay close to home, but they make something sweet from whatever's near." He leaned back against the rail, the porch creaking under his weight. "Then we'll set up a hive come thaw. I'll ask around for someone selling." Delaney folded her arms. "You don't think it's foolish? I think you're the first person to live here who sees more than what's already built." They stood in silence for a long while, watching the snow collect on the railings. "Do you miss anything from before?" she asked. He glanced at her. "Sometimes I miss the quiet that came with being alone. But I don't want it back." She reached for his hand, not out of need, but out of understanding. "I'm not afraid of being alone," she said. "But I want to be wanted for more than what I can do." Merritt turned toward her fully. "I don't want you for what you can do. I want you because you stay even when you could have left. Because you see what isn't said." Delaney stepped closer. "Then say something now." "I love you," he said simply. "Not in a way that needs proving. Just in the way you stand there, and I know I'm not alone." She rested her forehead against his chest, his arms folding around her without hesitation. "I love you too," she whispered. "And I want the bees, and the cellar, and whatever comes after that." His laugh was low in his chest. "Then that's what we'll have." Inside, the fire had burned down to coals, but there was no need to stoke it just yet. The warmth between them reached farther than the hearth, into the rooms they'd filled with quiet trust and the long-built ease of 2 people no longer waiting to belong. By mid-December, the land had gone still. Snow blanketed the pasture in thick silence, muting even the cattle's lowing. The creek behind the ridge had frozen solid, its surface glazed in white. Merritt walked its banks each morning, checking for signs of predators, his rifle slung low across his back. Delaney watched him from the window some days, her hands idle over the mending. She had made the house warm, but it was Merritt's steadiness that made it feel lived in. The hive he'd promised had arrived early, carted in by a trader from Bozeman who'd owed him for a bull calf. The bees were dormant in the cold, tucked in straw and burlap, but Delaney had already chosen the spot where they'd go come spring, a slope that caught morning light and sat sheltered from the wind. One morning, She stood in the doorway with a cloak around her shoulders and a folded paper in her hand. "I had a letter from Bethany," she said. Merritt took off his gloves and stepped inside, brushing snow from his collar. She's expecting." Her voice caught in a breath. "She wanted to thank you for what you gave me, for what it gave her." Merritt stepped close and took the letter from her fingers. "I didn't give it. You earned it. She said she'd name the child after you if it's a boy." He blinked once. "That's a fine thing." Delaney looked up at him. "I'd like to visit her once the road's clear." He nodded slowly. "I'll ride with you." "No," she said gently. "I want to go alone. Just for a few days." His jaw flexed, not in protest, but in thought. "You afraid to travel without me?" "I'm not afraid. I just want you to know I'll come back." He touched the edge of her cheek. "I know that already." She left the following week, bundled in wool and carrying fresh preserves and a quilt she'd made from old flannel scraps. The stage took her east, and Merritt stood at the fence line long after it disappeared. In her absence, he kept the house clean and the fire fed. He fed the livestock, checked the traps, and left the lamp burning in the window each night. The quiet was different now, not empty, but waiting. Delaney returned 5 days later, wind-chapped and smiling. She brought back a tin of peppermint bark and a new pair of gloves for him, stitched with care. He took them without a word, pressing them once to his chest before setting them by the door. That night, they sat by the fire with their chairs pulled close. She leaned into his side, her head tucked beneath his chin. "Bethany says it'll be a spring birth. She's already picked names." He rested his hand over hers. "And you?" She looked up. "I want children. But not because we're expected to. I want them because I see a life unfolding here." Merritt's voice was low. "Then let it unfold." They didn't speak more of it, but the understanding sat quietly between them, like the snow resting on the roof, heavy, but safe. As the new year came, Delaney began keeping a journal. Not of things past, but of things hoped for. She wrote of the beehive, of a second barn for calves, of a loom she hoped to buy from town come summer. Merritt never read the pages, but he built shelves in the corner of the bedroom so she'd have a place to keep them. They spent the winter side by side, their days filled with work and their nights with warmth. He taught her how to sharpen a blade. She taught him to bake bread without burning the crust. They learned each other's silences and each other's laughter, and the quiet in-between moments that needed no translation. By March, the snow had begun to melt. The path to town reemerged, slick with mud and thaw. Delaney stood at the edge of the porch, watching the first crocus push through the damp earth. Merritt came up behind her, slid his arms around her waist. "You still want the bees?" She nodded. "I've already carved the markers for the hive. I thought we'd name each colony after something we wanted to keep." He kissed the top of her head. "Then save one for me." She turned in his arms, looking into the face she'd come to trust more than the sky above. "I already have." They planted new seed that spring, built the root cellar, set up the hive. When summer came, the hills turned gold again, and the cattle grazed fat and easy in the fields. Merritt watched her from the hayloft one day, her skirts hitched as she carried wood to the smokehouse. He climbed down, took the basket from her hands, and kissed her beneath the sycamore without needing a reason. In the fall, she missed her courses by a single day, and they both laughed when she told him. "I think we'll need a cradle," she said. "I'll build one that lasts 100 years. You always build things to last. And I always will." They named their first child Ruth, after Merritt's mother. She had her father's quiet eyes and her mother's hands. The house grew louder, but never lost its peace. Years passed. The bees came and stayed. The root cellar filled. The land changed shape with the seasons, But the house stood steady. So did they. And every winter, when snow returned to the fields and the fire burned low, Merritt would find Delaney's hand beneath the quilt, and hold it like he had that first night, not out of need, but out of love. Always love. They lived long and they lived well, and neither of them ever left.